Welcome to Cluster Fudge, the podcast that unravels the mess one thread at a time. I'm your host, Alexandra, and today's episode is one of deep recognition and honest nuance. We're talking about the men and women who wear the badge, the ones who show up when most of us run, the ones who step into chaos, danger, heartbreak, and human fragility every single day. This episode is titled, Salute to the Boys in Blue, the ones who honestly and truly protect and serve. Now, I know policing in America is complicated. The institution has faced justified criticism, and we've seen scandals, abuse of power, and devastating failures. But today's episode is about something different. It's about the officers who honor the oath, the ones who do protect and do serve. This is a moment to separate the abusers of power from those who safeguard it, and to give credit where it's due, because some heroes don't wear capes, they wear a badge. Let's begin. Let's strip away the TV drama. Let's toss aside the Hollywood explosions, the high-speed chases, and the tough guy one-liners, because the reality of policing, real, on-the-ground, daily law enforcement, isn't glamorous. It isn't always action-packed. It's difficult, often thankless, and emotionally and physically exhausting. The truth is, policing is one of the most complex and emotionally taxing professions in society. Officers are expected to wear many hats: first responder, counsellor, peacekeeper, investigator, social worker, crisis mediator, and occasionally, yes, defender in life-threatening situations, all within the span of a single shift. But let's get specific. What does the real job of policing actually require? 1. Rapid decision-making under pressure. Imagine walking into an unknown situation, not knowing who's armed, who's afraid, who's lying, or who's just had the worst day of their life. And now imagine having seconds, sometimes less, to assess it all and make a choice. Officers must be trained to manage adrenaline, fear, and information overload. They have to make critical decisions in dynamic, often chaotic environments, and the consequences of a wrong call can be deadly for themselves or for others. Police officers don't just witness trauma, they absorb it. Domestic abuse calls, overdose scenes, suicides, missing children, elder neglect, fatal car crashes. They carry the pain of 1,000 strangers, often without time to process or decompress. The accumulation of emotional scars can lead to burnout, PTSD, depression, or worse. And yet, the expectation remains: show up again tomorrow, serve again tomorrow. Effective policing isn't about brute force or control. It's about understanding human behaviour and applying the law with wisdom and discernment. Officers must know legal boundaries inside and out, but also must interpret the context of each situation. Not every encounter requires an arrest. Sometimes what's needed is de-escalation or redirection or simply listening. The best officers use discretion with both compassion and accountability. Contrary to some narratives, many good officers don't see themselves as warriors. They see themselves as guardians. They strive to be present in their communities, to know names, to recognise faces, to build trust with youth and the elderly alike. They attend neighbourhood watch meetings, school events and church gatherings, because the best protection isn't surveillance, it's relationship. Real safety comes when people feel seen, heard and respected by those in uniform. Adaptability in an evolving society. The job of policing today is different from what it was 30 years ago. New technology, new threats, mental health crises, social unrest, public skepticism. Officers are expected to evolve to be trauma-informed, culturally competent, and constantly retrained. It's not enough to graduate the academy and coast. Good cops are lifelong learners, constantly updating their approach to fit the needs of a changing world. Let's not sugarcoat it. Police work comes with a steep price: missed holidays, missed birthdays, constant exposure to risk. Statistically, officers have a shorter life expectancy than the general population. They're more likely to suffer from chronic health conditions and mental health issues. And on top of that, their families, spouses, children, parents live every day with the uncertainty of whether their loved one will make it home. Courage with restraint. It's easy to mistake bravery for aggression, but true courage in policing often looks like restraint. Walking away from provocation, de-escalating a situation that could spiral into violence, choosing words over weapons. That takes strength, that takes training, And it's something the best officers demonstrate on a daily basis, in thousands of quiet moments the public never sees. So when we talk about honouring the men and women who truly serve and protect, we're not romanticising the badge, we're acknowledging the reality. The real job of policing is hard. It demands discipline, empathy, intelligence, and deep emotional stamina. And for those who rise to meet that calling, who wear the badge with humility and integrity, they deserve not just a paycheck, but our gratitude. Let's give them that space. Let's give them that respect. And as we move forward in this episode, let's remember, the real job isn't just about enforcement, it's about service. Let's take a moment to do what we often don't do when we talk about policing in America. Look at the data, not just the drama, because the truth is most of what dominates our media consumption are exceptions, not the rule. We see the horror stories, the body cam failures, the abuses, and yes, we must. Accountability is essential. Transparency is vital. But what gets buried in the outrage cycle are the thousands, yes, thousands of police officers across the country who quietly serve their communities with honour, with patience, and with sacrifice. So today, let's spotlight the numbers and paint a more balanced picture. Let's talk about who's really protecting our communities and what those efforts actually look like on the ground. Most officers never fire their weapon. This may surprise some people, especially if your perception of policing has been shaped by movies, television, or even high-profile viral incidents. According to a Pew Research Centre survey, over 70% of police officers have never fired their weapon while on duty. That's right, the majority of officers spend their entire careers without ever having to discharge their firearm in the line of duty. Why does that matter? Because it tells us something we don't often hear. Most police work isn't about violence. It's about presence, prevention, mediation, support. Officers spend their days writing reports, calming disputes, checking on welfare calls, directing traffic, responding to alarms that turn out to be false, talking someone down from a mental health crisis. 2. The scope of the job is enormous. Let's be clear. In the US alone, there are approximately 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies across federal, state, local and tribal jurisdictions. That's over 800,000 sworn officers. According to FBI statistics, law enforcement agencies respond to over 240 million calls for service each year. That's an average of 650,000 calls per day. And the vast majority of those interactions, they do not involve violence, they do not end in arrests, and they are not headline-worthy, but they are necessary. A lost child, reunited with their mother, a welfare check on an elderly man who hasn't been seen in days, a traffic stop that uncovers a missing person alert, a routine patrol that prevents a burglary before it happens. Let's not forget about rural America, where departments are often tiny, underfunded and stretched thin, but the role they play is massive. In some small towns, a single officer or sheriff's deputy may be the only public safety presence for dozens of miles. These officers wear multiple hats: law enforcement, EMT, fire department backup, and even informal therapist. They're not chasing gang shootouts or drug kingpins. They're walking seniors to their cars, helping families after house fires, responding to farm accidents, talking teens out of bad decisions, and mentoring kids who need guidance. That's protection. That's service. That's the job. 4. Diversity in the ranks is growing. Here's another stat that rarely gets mentioned. The law enforcement workforce is becoming more diverse, even though we still have work to do. As of 2022, 15% of police officers nationwide are women, up from 8% in the 1980s. Approximately 30% are officers of colour, including Black, Latino, and Asian American officers. Some major metropolitan departments have majority-minority police forces, and many are led by Black or Latino police chiefs. These aren't just optics. Diversity within police departments often leads to better community relations, less use of force, and stronger neighbourhood trust, especially in historically marginalised communities. And the officers stepping up to serve in this way? They're changing the culture from within. They're working for accountability while still showing up, still doing the job.
5.
Mental health and social services response. Another quiet revolution is happening in the form of community-oriented policing and crisis intervention training, CIT. Today, many departments are prioritizing training in de-escalation tactics, trauma-informed response, mental health awareness, addiction and overdose intervention. In cities like Denver, San Antonio and Eugene, with the COHOOTS program, officers work side by side with social workers, paramedics and mental health professionals to deliver help instead of harm. In fact, up to 20% of all police calls involve a mental health component. And many of the officers handling those cases are learning how to respond with care, not cuffs, something the public demanded, and officers across the country are adapting to with dignity. Let's talk about what many forget. The price some officers pay for simply doing their job. According to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, in 2023 alone, 136 officers lost their lives in the line of duty. That includes gunfire, traffic incidents, ambushes, and medical complications sustained while serving. Each one of those names represents a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, someone who didn't come home from their shift. Someone who ran toward the threat while others ran away. We should never forget their sacrifice. We can demand reform and still honour courage. The two are not mutually exclusive. So the next time someone asks who's really protecting our communities, we should answer honestly. It's the men and women who sit through 911 calls and keep their calm. It's the officers who build trust instead of breaking it. It's the deputies in small towns, the patrol officers in big cities, the ones who serve without seeking attention, who prevent more harm than we'll ever know, because their intervention stopped it before it started. That's not always visible in statistics, but it's real, and it matters. When we talk about police reform, justice and public safety, the one word that keeps coming up is trust. And trust is not a luxury in policing, it's a necessity. You see, law enforcement isn't just about enforcing the law, it's about creating a sense of safety before things fall apart. It's about showing up before a crisis spirals. And it's about cultivating relationships that allow the community to see the badge not as a symbol of fear, but as a symbol of reliability, responsibility, and yes, protection. But here's the thing. You don't build trust with a uniform. You build trust with action, with presence, with consistency, with listening. Let's break down exactly what that looks like when police officers put community first. Community policing isn't new. In fact, it goes back to the earliest days of modern law enforcement, but it gained prominence in the 1980s and 1990s as departments realized that reactive, force-heavy models of policing were breaking communities instead of bonding them. At its core, community policing means officers don't just patrol neighbourhoods, they become part of them. They don't just show up when something goes wrong. They show up when things are calm, to say hello, visit a school, attend a local event, or check in with a business owner. When people know their officers by name, trust starts to grow. Suspicion decreases, reporting goes up, cooperation improves, and neighbourhoods become proactive partners in safety, not passive observers, or worse, victims of policing. Studies consistently show that community-based policing reduces crime, increases trust, and strengthens social bonds. It's not about going easy, it's about going smart. 2. Officers as social connectors. Let's think of this from another angle. Officers who engage in community-first models often become bridges between services and citizens, especially in underserved areas where resources are scarce. In many communities, a police officer might be the only consistent government contact someone has. So when that contact is positive, compassionate, and professional, it opens doors to so much more. Help for a victim of domestic violence, a warm handoff to mental health support, a heads up about a youth mentoring program, a word of advice that steers a teenager away from a gang and toward opportunity. In short, good policing doesn't just enforce laws, it opens possibilities. 3. Listening is a law enforcement skill. One of the greatest tools an officer can have isn't a weapon, it's an ear. In neighbourhoods that have experienced over-policing or racial profiling, trust has to be earned slowly and sincerely. Officers who engage with humility, who listen before they lecture, and who show up consistently even when it's inconvenient, those are the ones who make the difference. And people notice. A study from the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice found that when officers take the time to explain their actions and listen to community concerns, even during stops or arrests, citizens are more likely to view them as legitimate, fair, and trustworthy, even if the interaction is difficult. That's the power of procedural justice. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. 4. Youth outreach, building tomorrow's trust today. Let's talk about kids for a second. In many neighbourhoods, children form their opinion of law enforcement at a very young age. And unfortunately, that opinion is often shaped by fear or trauma. That's why outreach efforts matter. School visits, youth sports leagues sponsored by the police, coffee with a cop, community barbecues, explorer programs, ride-alongs, mentorships. These aren't PR gimmicks, they're trust-building in action. They send a powerful message. We are here, not just when it's bad, but always. Because when a child grows up knowing Officer Martinez or Deputy Johnson, not as a threat, but as a protector, the perception of policing shifts from intimidation to collaboration. 5. Accountability equals trust. Now let's be clear, building trust is not about ignoring misconduct or brushing aside injustice. It's about addressing it head on and showing the community that there is a difference between an officer who abuses their power and one who honours it. Departments that take accountability seriously, that investigate misconduct transparently, discipline officers consistently, and involve citizens in oversight, often gain more trust, not less. Because the public doesn't expect perfection, but they do expect honesty. And when good officers are willing to say, that wasn't right and we will fix it, it sends a powerful signal. We are on your side. We are accountable to you. Hammer 6, cultural competency and language sensitivity. In diverse neighbourhoods, trust also depends on cultural literacy. Officers who can speak the language, literally and figuratively, of the communities they serve are better equipped to de-escalate, connect and understand. Departments across the country are now implementing implicit bias training, cultural awareness workshops, language access programs, faith community partnerships. Why? Because effective policing requires empathy and context. You can't protect what you don't understand, and you can't serve who you don't respect. Let's close this segment with a few quick real-world examples, the kind that don't make national headlines but change lives. In Camden, New Jersey, a complete overhaul of the police department in favour of a community-first model resulted in a 42% drop in violent crime and dramatic increase in public trust. In Rogers, Arkansas, police partnered with local non-profits to embed social workers within the department, giving officers real-time access to resources for addiction, homelessness, and family crises. In Watts, Los Angeles, the Community Safety Partnership Program led to the same officers being assigned to the same housing developments for years, resulting in stronger relationships, reduced tensions, and lower crime. These stories don't go viral, but they should. At the end of the day, fear-based policing is unsustainable. It alienates the very people it's meant to protect. It creates cycles of silence, not cooperation, and it makes neighbourhoods less safe, not more. But when officers put community first, when they see their role not just as enforcers of law, but as stewards of peace, the entire dynamic changes. Trust is built, partnerships grow, and the badge becomes not a barrier, but a bridge. We ask too much. We expect them to be brave but never break down. We expect them to be warriors and guardians at the same time. We want them to chase criminals and counsel victims. We ask them to be EMTs, mediators, social workers, protectors, and community liaisons, all rolled into one. And we ask them to do it all perfectly, under pressure, on camera, and often while being hated, second-guessed, or even targeted. This segment is about something that's often overlooked in the national conversation, the personal toll that this job takes on the human being behind the badge. Because whether or not we support reform or back the badge, one thing is undeniable. Policing is a high-risk, high-stress, emotionally grueling job. Let's take a deep, honest look at what we're asking of the people who wear the uniform. Let's begin with what we can't see, the psychological toll. A study by the Ruderman Family Foundation found that first responders are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. Let that sink in. The stress, the trauma, the exposure to violence, the images they can't unsee, the emotions they're taught to suppress. Officers routinely respond to deadly accidents, domestic violence scenes, child abuse, suicides, mass shootings, death notifications to grieving families, and they're expected to do it with poise, with control, with detachment, while being videotaped, judged, and sometimes threatened. That kind of chronic exposure reshapes the brain. PTSD is common, so is depression. And tragically, many officers don't seek help because there's a stigma, a fear that admitting emotional struggle will make them seem unfit, weak, or unworthy of the badge. But the truth is, officers are human, and humans crack under repeated, unresolved trauma. Being a cop doesn't end when the shift ends. The job follows you home. It bleeds into marriages, parenting, sleep patterns, and peace of mind. Police families live with a unique kind of tension. Will mom or dad come home tonight? What happens if they're ambushed at a traffic stop? What if their face ends up on the news, misunderstood, misrepresented, or worse? And the officer themselves, they carry that burden too. Many struggle to shut off the hypervigilance that keeps them alive on the streets. They're on guard at the grocery store, the movie theatre, even at home. Their nervous system never relaxes. Divorce rates in law enforcement families are significantly higher than the national average. So are substance abuse rates, especially alcohol. Not because officers are bad people, but because the job demands so much and offers few outlets to decompress. This isn't just a profession. For many, it's a lifelong identity, one that often isolates more than it connects. Every call could be the last. Every time an officer puts on the uniform, they put a target on their back. In 2024 alone, dozens of officers in the United States were killed in the line of duty, with hundreds more assaulted or wounded. According to the FBI's Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted database, attacks on police, both fatal and non-fatal, have been increasing in recent years. Sometimes it's a domestic dispute gone sideways. Sometimes it's a routine traffic stop that turns deadly. Sometimes it's ambush-style violence by someone with a vendetta against the uniform. The truth is, there is no such thing as a routine day in policing. Every call could escalate. Every knock on a door could be their last. And that reality weighs heavily on the officers and their families. Beyond the physical and mental strain, there's another lesser-known form of damage that officers face. It's called moral injury, and it refers to the deep emotional pain that arises when a person's values and actions are in conflict. For example, an officer who has to shoot a suspect to save a hostage and then relives the moment for years. A detective who can't save a child from abuse despite doing everything possible. A patrol officer who watches a broken system fail to help the same people over and over again. These aren't just bad days. These are soul wounds, internal conflicts that can lead to guilt, disillusionment, and a sense of despair. The badge may shield them from bullets, but not from heartbreak. We live in a world of smartphones, social media, and instant outrage. Every action by an officer is now public, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. And while transparency is essential for accountability, it also means officers now live under a constant microscope, judged by headlines, hashtags, and viral clips that often lack context. Imagine doing your job under stress with lives on the line, knowing that a single misstep could destroy your career, your reputation, or your family's safety. That's not paranoia, that's real. And it adds another layer of stress to a job already bursting with pressure. Yes, we need to hold bad actors accountable, but we also need to recognise that perfection under fire is impossible, and that painting all officers with a broad brush only pushes the good ones away. So what's the takeaway here? That we as a society need to balance criticism with compassion, that we need to support the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of officers without excusing misconduct, that we can push for reform and accountability, while also acknowledging that the job is brutal, thankless, and often misunderstood. What does support look like? Mandatory and stigma-free mental health care for officers, time off after traumatic incidents, fair wages and retirement security, community programs that let officers connect with citizens in non-crisis settings, public dialogue that avoids stereotypes and embraces nuance. When we ask someone to protect us with their life, their time, their energy and their sanity, we owe them more than slogans. We owe them understanding, support, and respect for the toll they carry. We should absolutely demand professionalism and accountability from every officer who wears the badge. But we should also remember, beneath the uniform is a human being, tired, tested, and doing their best. Let's honour that. Let's get something straight. Accountability and admiration are not mutually exclusive. Let me say it again, just louder for the culture warriors in the back. You can demand better from an institution while still honouring those who serve with integrity. You can fight for reform without fighting the people who uphold the law. You can love what something stands for, even when it doesn't always live up to it. This is one of the most emotionally complex aspects of the conversation around policing in America, and it's where the discourse so often breaks down. On one side, you have people yelling, "Defund the police!" On the other, people yelling, "Back the blue," as if these are two football teams battling it out on a Sunday. But this isn't a game. This is our justice system. These are people's lives. And the truth is far more layered than those slogans suggest. Let's dig into this. Why accountability matters, even for heroes. Let's start with the word that makes some folks uncomfortable. Accountability. Accountability is not anti-cop. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's a sign of respect for the profession. We hold doctors accountable when they commit malpractice because lives are at stake. We hold pilots accountable when they make errors because safety is non-negotiable. We hold judges accountable for their rulings because justice demands scrutiny. So why wouldn't we hold law enforcement accountable too? Accountability means having high standards. It means we believe the role is so important, so impactful, that it must be held to the highest levels of professionalism, fairness, and integrity. It's not about catching bad cops. It's about protecting good ones from being lumped in with those who abuse their power. Now let's talk about admiration. What are we actually admiring when we salute the boys in blue? We're admiring the courage it takes to walk into danger, the humanity it takes to comfort a crying child at a car crash, the steadiness required to de-escalate a violent domestic dispute, the commitment to protecting neighbourhoods most people ignore. We're admiring the best of what law enforcement can be. The selfless, the disciplined, the community-minded, the ones who don't just enforce the law, but embody it with integrity and compassion. When we admire the uniform done right, we aren't idolising perfection. We're celebrating the sacrifice. But, and here's the kicker, true admiration should never require silence in the face of injustice. If anything, it demands that we speak up, not out of hatred, but out of belief in what law enforcement should be. One of the greatest threats to progress is binary thinking. That is, this idea that we can only hold one truth at a time. You're either pro-cop or anti-cop. You either support law enforcement or you support the community. That's a false choice. It's emotional propaganda and it's dangerous. The truth is, you can stand with victims of police misconduct and still respect officers who risk everything to protect people. You can advocate for criminal justice reform and still want your local precinct to be well-resourced and well-led. You can mourn a life lost at the hands of police and also mourn an officer ambushed in the line of duty. Two truths can exist at once. And if we want a healthier, safer, more united country, we have to make peace with that nuance. The officer's role in upholding that balance. Let's talk directly to the people in uniform because they have a vital role in navigating this tension. Good officers, the ones this episode is celebrating, must understand that accountability protects them. It separates the corrupt from the courageous. It builds trust in communities where fear and resentment have grown, and it ensures that the badge remains a symbol of honour, not of unchecked authority. And officers have the power to report misconduct, mentor younger cops in community policing, advocate for mental health care and de-escalation training, support policies that increase transparency, like body cameras and independent review boards. When good cops stand up for reform, they're not betraying the brotherhood, they're strengthening it. And what about the public? We have responsibilities too. We have to stop treating every officer like a villain just because the system has flaws. We have to recognise acts of kindness, compassion and bravery and talk about them, share them, uplift them. That means applauding officers who peacefully de-escalate high-risk situations, celebrating departments that invest in community outreach and transparency, sharing stories where officers go above and beyond, even if it doesn't trend on Twitter. We must challenge abuse, yes, but we must also elevate excellence, because if we don't, we risk demoralising the very people who are trying to be the difference. Final thought for this segment. If you love this country, if you love safety, order, peace and justice, then you should want better policing. You should want a force that is not only respected, but worthy of that respect. And you should never feel ashamed to admire those who wear the badge with integrity, bravery and humility, just as you should never be afraid to demand accountability when that badge is misused. Because in the end, accountability and admiration aren't opposites. They are two sides of the same coin, a coin that only gains value when it's built on truth. And maybe, just maybe, if we learn to hold both truths at once, we can start rebuilding trust in the badge, one honest conversation at a time. Sometimes the headlines don't tell the full story. They fixate on failures, they magnify misconduct, and they should, because accountability matters. But today we shift our lens, not to ignore the failures, but to balance the narrative. Because beneath the uniform, beyond the badge, behind the headlines, there are stories. Stories of compassion, stories of quiet courage, stories of humanity. This segment is about the officers who don't go viral, not because they haven't done something extraordinary, but because they do it quietly, humbly, without cameras, without applause. 1. Officer Kimberly Munley. Let's go back to 2009, Fort Hood, a US Army base in Texas. A mass shooting is underway. Chaos, bloodshed, lives in danger, but one officer didn't wait. Kimberly Munley, a civilian Department of Defense police officer, rushed toward the gunfire, alone. Armed with just a handgun, she confronted the shooter, engaged in a firefight. She was shot 3 times in the leg, wrist and thigh and kept fighting. Because of her, the shooter was stopped. Because of her, more lives weren't lost. Because of her, dozens of families still had someone to hold that night. Was she a soldier? No. Was she a national figure? Not for long. But was she a hero? Absolutely. And yet her name is barely known outside law enforcement circles. That's what we mean by real hero. In 2021, catastrophic flooding hit Tennessee. Entire homes were swept away. Roads disappeared, elderly residents trapped in attics, families clinging to rooftops. Deputy David Clark was one of dozens of rural deputies who worked non-stop in flooded conditions, without any tactical gear, without reinforcements, and with only a local volunteer fire crew for backup. He carried out over 40 rescues in a 48-hour period, waded through sewage-filled water, pulled a toddler from a submerged car seat, moments before the current took the vehicle downstream. He wasn't a national headline, but to the town of Waverly, Tennessee, he was their lifeline, their literal rescue line. That is the story of everyday heroism that doesn't make cable news, but defines the word service. Let's talk about mental health calls. The ones that require a different kind of bravery, not the kind that faces bullets, but the kind that faces another person's despair. Officer Patrick Kinney from Des Moines, Iowa, responded to a call about a man threatening to jump from a freeway overpass. Traffic was blocked. SWAT was en route. But Kinney got there first. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't shout commands. He sat for 90 minutes on the ledge. He sat with the man. He told him, "You're not alone." He told him about his own struggles with anxiety. He said, "You matter." Eventually the man cried, then climbed back to safety. He later said, "That officer saved my life, not because he stopped me, but because he listened." That is the quiet work of heroes, and it happens more than we know. Not all heroism is reactive. Some of it is preventative. Like John Velasquez in Newark, New Jersey, runs a youth diversion program out of his precinct. It's called Shields to Shoes. The goal? Keep first-time juvenile offenders out of the system and give them mentorship instead. He personally mentors 20-plus teens every year, takes them to job interviews, helps them get GEDs, coaches their sports teams. Many of those kids now work in civil service, private security, or social work. Some are even applying to the police academy because, as one graduate said, Lutvi didn't just save my life, he gave me a new one. That's real protection, that's real service, and you don't need body armor to do it. Let's be honest, not every heroic act ends up in the local paper, let alone on national TV, because every day officers across America deliver food to hungry families after hours, sit with a grieving widow who just lost her husband, take a child away from an abusive home, and then check in for years after. Pull over a reckless teenager and instead of cuffing him, take him home and talk to the parents. Cry in their car after witnessing another trauma and still come back the next day. That is heroism too. It's not always cinematic. It's not always clean, but it is real and it is noble. Sometimes it feels like heroism has to come with a uniform, a speech, a medal, but true heroism is often humble, often quiet, often invisible. These stories, Officer Munley, Deputy Clark, Officer Kinney, Lieutenant Velasquez, are just a few among thousands. And they remind us why, in this episode, we're taking a moment to salute the ones who honestly and truly protect and serve. Not blindly, not without discernment, but with clear eyes, with full hearts, and with deep earned gratitude. Because behind every badge worn with honour, there's a human being doing something extraordinary, simply because it's the right thing to do. We've reached the end of this episode, but not the end of the conversation, and certainly not the end of the gratitude. Because today, we've done something that's long overdue in so many public spaces. We've saluted, not blindly, not recklessly, not with eyes shut, ears closed, and mouths zipped, but with eyes wide open, fully aware of the system's flaws, its failures, and the work that still needs to be done, and yet still choosing to recognise the good. Because in a world too quick to flatten nuance, we must resist the urge to paint every officer with the same brush, just as we would resist being defined by the worst among any group. Today's episode was not about denying the truth of bad policing. It was about refusing to deny the truth of good policing. Let's say this clearly. Yes, police departments must evolve. Yes, accountability and reform are non-negotiable. Yes, we must call out and root out corruption, cruelty, and abuse wherever it hides. But none of that means we stop seeing the men and women who get up every day, put on a vest, kiss their kids goodbye, and walk into the unpredictable, who walk into burning homes, who talk people down from ledges, who cradle a trauma victim as they wait for paramedics, who risk everything, not because they love danger, but because they believe in duty. And for every officer we lose in the line of duty, a family is shattered, a partner gets that call, a child loses a parent, and a community loses someone who showed up when it counted. So when we say salute, we don't mean unquestioning loyalty. We mean earned respect, the kind that isn't given freely, but the kind that grows when service is real, when sacrifice is visible, when honour is lived, not claimed. Let's also remember this. It's easy to criticise. It's easy to reduce people to symbols or labels, but it takes more courage, more integrity, to admit that good people do hard jobs under impossible circumstances. And some of them do it beautifully. And those officers? They deserve more than suspicion. They deserve gratitude. They deserve a salute, not from the pedestal of fantasy, but from the grounded place of respect. Because admiring the honourable doesn't mean excusing the dishonourable. It means refusing to throw away the truth of decency, just because it's less loud than the failures. Here's what we ask of you, dear listener. Next time you see a headline about misconduct, read it, understand it, demand justice. But also, when you see an officer kneeling to tie a frightened child's shoe, when you see one buying groceries for a struggling mom, when you hear about a rescue, a kindness, a moment of bravery, don't scroll past. Acknowledge it. Say thank you. recognize it for what it is, humanity in a uniform. Today we didn't simplify, we didn't sanitize, but we did honor. We honored the badge, not as a symbol of unchecked power, but as a call to serve. We honored the ones who live that calling, even when no one's watching. Let's keep watching. Let's keep questioning. Let's keep saluting with eyes open. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and never stop unraveling the mess.